Professor Peter Martin is our keynote, but he's not here, not because he's running late, because he's probably on some rock face in France at the moment. We've actually recorded him, and so we're going to share the next 24 minutes with you, his perspective on the purpose of outdoor education. And then directly following that, our plan is to invite the panel to be asked a few questions. So we're going to dim the lights.
Well, thanks for coming out here.
No worries.
I mean, it hasn't rained for what? Nearly 2 months, and we turn up to do a bit of climbing and do a bit of filming, and it's fantastic. We're actually getting some rain. But the conference theme, I suppose, our future outdoors is something that I've had a lot of time to think about, and I started teaching in 1979, and I've had every year since then of being involved in the outdoors, and I've thought a lot about sort of careers in outdoor ed and how to make that enduring. And I think it comes down to this, my 3 Ps. And each of these Ps, when you split them and have a look inside, there's a whole lot of little elements and little components that really make up what a P is. And the first P is passion. And if you're going to endure in outdoor education and you're going to help the profession evolve and contribute to it, then you've got to hang on to that passion. Cracker. And really enjoy being outdoors regardless of the weather and regardless of what's happening around you, developing those skills to be comfortable outdoors and really feed off the energy that comes in a natural setting. A key part of passion for me is doing your own outdoor adventures. Keeping up my own skill level, keeping up my own sets of experiences, I've always found really important and fundamental to my sense of kind of passion about wanting to share particularly rocky environments with students. The skills that I develop for myself are not the same skills that I use to teach, but clearly they're highly complementary. But I never want to be involved with students in the outdoors if I'm thinking, I don't want to be here, I'd rather be off doing my own thing. I want to make sure that I've done enough of my own personal experiences to really feel comfortable with students teaching, and I can concentrate absolutely fully on the educational role that I'm playing, and I'm not thinking, geez, I'd rather just be off there doing my own thing, or worse still, I'm really worried about where we are because my navigation's not good enough, or I'm really not certain about going here because I don't know where this route will take us, or whether this climb is too hard or too easy. That has to be just so second nature because you've spent, you spent time there because you want to spend time there. I suppose part of maintaining your passion is also developing your knowledge base, being aware of what people are saying about outdoor education, what people are saying about the environment, what people are saying about our relationship with nature. And so coming to conferences is a really important part of that, and reading the literature, reading articles and books, but also finding out what kids are getting out of their involvement with you. When was the last time you sat down with a group of students and talked to them about what they'd got out of the day, or more formally, done your own evaluation or tried to collate outcomes and see how that kind of matched with what your expectations were. So being passionate about not just your own skill and your own time, but being passionate about the educational value of what it is that you're doing. So you're actively engaged in saying, well, what are my students getting out of this experience? And I've done that informally all the time, as a lot of us do, but formally a number of times where I've interviewed students and I've collated responses over time. Some of them are pretty sobering, I think I've been doing a program for this sort of outcome, and I formally analyse all of these journals that people have written, and I discover that they're getting something completely different. Now, I ought to know that. If I'm going to be a good outdoor educator, I need to understand what I'm trying to achieve and what the students are getting out of those experiences, and do they match? You know how people talk about you've got to walk the talk? Well, there's never been a more accurate description. You've got to be able to understand the way the students are feeling because you've felt it yourself in your own trips. You've got to know where your limits are because you've explored those a little bit yourselves, and you know you've got heaps of reserve when those days inevitably stretch out and things don't go quite as planned, you know you've got all of that skill and that knowledge behind you because you've developed it through your own professional development, through your own outdoor learning and your own outdoor experience, and having a few epics that you kind of just get through. So this is the second of the P's I wanted to talk about, and that's purpose. And really it's, what is the purpose of outdoor education? Can we articulate now really clearly to the person sitting next to you or someone you meet in the pub that the purpose of outdoor ed is such and such, and this is what it contributes to education, this is what it ultimately contributes to society, and it's why we bother with the expense and the risk, be that sort of physical or psychological, with taking kids perhaps out of their sort of comfort zones on occasion and into places that they're less familiar with. This is a really clear purpose of outdoor ed. There's a few things that have worked against us in being able to articulate to the wider community what the purpose of outdoor ed is. The first one, I think, has to do with the invisibility of our purpose, that we have a lot of equipment, we load into a bus, we go off into the bush and disappear from the school ground. We get engaged in activities. This is what people see. This is what the students see. So they're all really transparent. But the reason that we're doing it, the why are we going where we're going, is often hidden. And I think it needs to be not hidden. Our educational aims, the intent of what we're after, the educational sort of ideology that underpins what we do and where we do it, we need to make them really transparent. It's interesting, even when you have a debate with teachers, some teachers who are very experienced in outdoor ed are saying, oh no, I don't talk to my students why I do something. That's up for them to reach their own conclusions and come to their own learning. Okay, that's fair enough, but if they never know where they're going, how do they know which road to take? And so I suppose I'm an advocate of talking about why we're doing something. This is the purpose of this sort of activity. So that's the first problem with this simple purpose narrative, is that our aims are often invisible. The second one is that we use an experiential method, which is really good. We have all of these strategies about experiential learning cycles, about how we can process that so students get outcomes that we're interested in. We're very good at that, but we can apply it to a whole range of different things. I think we need to have a conversation about the difference between outdoor education and outdoor learning. Outdoor learning, or as the New Zealanders would call it, learning outside the classroom, can just as easily be applied to drama, to art, to mathematics, to English, to a range of different curriculum areas and disciplines. And that's the power of experiential learning. But it does kind of confuse the message about what outdoor education can be about. The third kind of element that gets in the way of a clear purpose statement for outdoor education is that we don't prioritise well. You talk to enthusiastic outdoor educators and they say, look, it's personal development. I can spend a huge amount of time enabling these people to feel good about themselves, meet these challenges, or it's getting the group to work well together. Yep, we can do that. We can develop a sense of cooperation. It's really good for getting teachers and students to work well together. We can do environmental outcomes. It's better for academic work as well. We can develop senses of resilience. We can link it in with their PE and sort of personal fitness. All of those things are true. But what are we going to prioritise in our simple narrative and our statement about the purpose of outdoor ed? We need to make choices, I think. We need to make choices about what is that simple, unifying idea behind the idea of outdoor ed that we then apply to different outcomes, but that central idea behind the idea, what is that? For me, it's pretty simple. It's enabling students to value personal, direct experiences in nature that build to an enduring relationship over time. So basically, we're the only discipline area that encourages students to have this direct, hands-on personal relationship with the natural world. Nobody else does that. And we do that in a way that is about building a personal relationship, about a heartfelt sense of, geez, I like this place. this is part of my identity. Being an outdoors person is part of my identity. That's the sort of thing that we try to build with students, and I think that's the idea behind the idea. Direct personal relationships with the outdoors. How we answer that question of what the purpose is for you is going to vary from context to context. So depending on where you're working, whether you're working in schools, it's going to be driven more by curriculum. If you're working with at-risk youth, you have a clear mission there. Young people in perhaps a preschool setting, or if you're working in perhaps mental health areas or contexts related to environmental learning, environmental education. So what you actually are going to do in those will vary, but the idea behind all of it is that nature is a really powerful element with which we can develop a relationship that we can value over time. I think that's the idea behind outdoor education that underpins all of these different contextual practices. This whole idea of a personal relationship with nature yielding all sorts of different values, where does that come from? Well, it comes from our sense of being animals that have evolved over a long period of time in the Australian landscape and landscapes throughout the world, and our evolutionary link to that. So we're hardwired to respond to nature in a particular way. There's life-giving water. Landscape gardeners will use that water as a feature in the garden because they know that we relate to water in a particular way and it makes us feel calm. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from our evolutionary kind of root of needing to have water to be physically and mentally well. And so all of that notion of being connected to nature in an evolutionary sense is called biophilia. And so biophilia obviously has happened over a long period of time and over millennia, and it changes very, very slowly. It gives us a propensity to link into the values of being outdoors. But it's there as a propensity, it's not a motive. It only comes alive when it gets rekindled, when we're actually out in the bush and we become aware that, this is really quite pleasant, if we've got the skills to be comfortable. So biophilia gives us this propensity to get benefits of nature, but there's also this adaptation that's happening as a consequence of culture, of popular culture in particular, which means now we can't go anywhere without our phone and all those other sorts of things. So that's very, very rapid. And so we're trying to balance this evolutionary link with the natural world with a cultural dislocation from it. And so what outdoor education and our relationship with nature and building that relationship taps into is trying to sort of balance the cultural dislocation from nature with the evolutionary connection with nature in order to access those sorts of benefits. But for me, it all comes back to having this strong, personal, felt connection with the natural world. And let's face it, schools don't do that. School grounds are locked away from the rest of society enough as it is, let alone nature. So, let's get out there. I said before, being passionate is about walking the talk. Purpose is about talking the walk. To flip that over, we've got to be able to talk about what it is that we do in the sense of what we're ultimately trying to achieve, and to be consistent so that people recognise, that person's an outdoor educator. They're about getting people to develop, a close connection to the natural world. The last P for me is understanding the profession. And I know there are some people who think outdoor education is not a profession. I disagree really strongly, but maybe that's worth talking about. And I've kind of researched and read about what professions are, and there's a few signposts that indicate what a profession is. And the first one really I've already talked about, and that's that whole purpose that is somewhat unique, that contributes to the well-being of society and I would add the environment. I don't think there's another element of schooling in particular that contributes to that direct personal relationship the way that we do. So I think that's a unique purpose. So that whole purpose becomes a motive of service. And that's supported by a specialised body of knowledge. And our specialised body of knowledge has a couple of components. Clearly there's the experiential learning component, and that's all of the skill that's related to being outdoors comfortably, the risk management, looking after students, being able to teach well in the outdoors. That's a massive body of knowledge. And sometimes that whole skill development body of knowledge can be all-consuming, and we can begin to trick ourselves to think that that's all there is. But there's another really important body of knowledge which is about human-nature relationships itself. The material I was talking about before in terms of biophilia, but also environmental history, ecological literacy. You know, how have we as a species related to nature over time? How do we do so today? How is that manifest in our buildings and the way in which we live every day? What about elements of consumption? You know, how does that impact upon human-nature relationships? And then there's that whole critique of things like progress. Is progress always linear and ongoing? What about notions of time? You know, Indigenous people have a sense of cyclical time. We have time that's measured by a clock, not by seasons or anything else. The myth of the individual. You know, is the individual always more important than the planet? And is satisfaction always a function of the individual rather than a society? So there's a whole lot of material and a whole body of knowledge around human-nature relationship development and change over time. So we have this purpose, we have a body of knowledge, and then of course we have codes of ethics, way in which we operate. The simple ones like, you know, sort of leave no trace or challenge by choice, you know, they're kind of slogans that underpin our ethical practice. But there's deeper ones about whether we're ultimately contributing to environmental sustainability, or are we challenging it in the way in which we operate. And so there's lots of discussions to have around that, the notions of a kind of code of ethics. And then like any profession, there's a gatekeeping kind of component. You know, we like to make sure people have a certain standard of being able to work with young people outdoors. Today, I suppose, you know, a degree, teacher registration is the most obvious example of the gatekeeping kind of accreditation that our profession has, and it's there for a reason. It's because when people spend 3 years at a university, they learn stuff to a greater depth and think about things to a greater depth than people who don't. It also allows the profession to evolve in a particular direction if we can become unified about that. You know, maybe that's a bit controversial in the sense that it sort of, it might challenge the pathways that people have been able to use in order to come into outdoor education, but in a way that ultimately, if we're going to evolve well and sustain ourselves as a profession into the next millennia, we need to be more unified about the conversations that we have about the critical thinking that we employ in order to determine the contributions that we're making, the ethical pathways that we follow, and the knowledge base that we hold to be our own. One of the examples that for me brings together sort of notions of professionalism is when we talk about sense of place. Like for me, sense of place is quintessentially outdoor education practice, that we can develop an understanding of a particular environment, a particular place in the environment, you know, like here, in much the same way as we would develop a relationship with a friend. And I've used that sort of getting to know nature like a friend as a metaphor in my teaching a lot. And when we think about the way in which we get to know people, you know, over time, emotionally connected to them, we have conversations with them, we know how they respond, we have a reciprocation where we give to them and they give back to us. And it's exactly the same with particular environments, particular places. And I think to teach well in a place implies that you know and understand that place really well. And that's a really good example for me of professionalism in outdoor education where as a teacher I know and understand a place well because I've been there a lot of times. And I'm not worried about whether this climb will be too difficult, because I know where all the difficult sections are. I know where the ledges are that are big enough to accommodate the size of the party that I've got with me. I know if it starts to rain I can nick off to the side and there's a little overhang or a cave. like, or today there's this slab we can sit underneath. So there's this sense of knowing a place intimately in the way in which you'd know a close friend. It brings together the notion of professionalism because we've got this purpose, developing a relationship, and then there's this whole knowledge that relates to understanding that environment, that particular place, and a way of being and operating within that place. Interestingly, it throws up a whole lot of questions about leadership, I reckon, because we have two caricatures, sort of extremes in leadership in outdoor education. We have the sort of traditional model of leadership which lends itself, it's probably a military model, like we can drop in, fly in, anybody, provided they've got good nav, a wilderness first aid, and they've got some good basic skills and they know how to talk to people, they can run a program anywhere. And so we have this notion of an outdoor leader having those skills. The understanding of the place in which they're going is sort of subjugated, really. It's not that important because we know that they've got some environmental skills that they might have learnt somewhere and they can identify some birds or, So that's one caricature. And the other is the one we're alerted to through sort of indigenous ways of knowing, where people don't have sort of complex paper-based maps and they don't have bits of equipment that allow them to be in that particular landscape. They have a deep and well-developed, intimate knowledge of the landscape. And so they're wandering through places and following sort of journey lines that are based as a consequence of a long, intimate relationship with a particular place. And you teach in a very different way in one model of leadership versus the other. For me, the sense of place-based teaching implies a model of outdoor education that I really enjoy. If I was a Minister of Education and I was asked to develop a set of safety guidelines around outdoor education, I wouldn't have anything to do with skills and all of that. I'd just basically say, you need to have been to this place a lot of times in a lot of different weathers, doing the sorts of activities that you're planning to do repeatedly, probably through a more an experiential apprenticeship-based kind of system. And that's the only safety guidelines you need. Probably need to just add one other thing about professionalism, and that is that whole notion of professionalism sort of circles around the way in which the public perceive that what you have to offer is worthwhile. There's no question about what doctors offer to the community. There's a bit of question about what lawyers might offer to the community, but there is certainly question around what outdoor educators offer to the community. And so part of being really clear about our purpose and being clear about the knowledge base that we have and what we have to contribute helps us get the sort of public recognition that our contribution is worthy. Because I suppose ultimately it's about, your hip pocket and what you get paid for your work. And if your work is valued, then it's remunerated appropriately within our society. And I suppose, when I open my wallet, I've now got a card that says I'm old, and having a seniors card is kind of nice because it means that I've managed to get a career in outdoor ed that spanned, nearly 40 years. And I've been really fortunate to have worked in the university sector, which can be enduring and is well paid. And it gives you space to sort of think and talk and have a normal life as well as being with kids in the bush. But if we're not more unified and clearer about our purpose, I don't think we'll ever get to the stage where we can have what is a better rate of pay, particularly for people who are freelancing, particularly for people that don't have the luxury that I've had of a salaried position for a few decades, because that sort of work is now kind of disappearing in our society anyway. So we need to make sure that what we are offering is something that society values and does not want to dispense with. And I think we're getting better. I think there was a bit of a blip around the financial crisis of sort of 2008 where suddenly environmental concerns disappeared. But our basic improving and enabling people to value their relationship with nature and then all of the benefits that can flow from that is something that in society, particularly Western society, we sorely need that. And the growth of bush kinders and recognising the value of the outdoors as a developmental experience is only putting us in a stronger position now, I think, to make the sort of noise that we need to say, here we are, you know, we're the profession that enables people to develop the connection with nature that's so essential for their health and well-being, so essential for the promotion of social justice, so essential for sustainable living into the future for the environment and for humanity. And we know this and we can do this really well.
We could certainly applaud and acknowledge the content that we've just heard, and we're going to explore more of that in just a moment. But I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the production values of what we just saw. You don't get that standing in front of a podium and a microphone. So Nick Cavalli, where is Nick? I know he's wandering around. Would you please acknowledge Nick and his work in creating that? I will share the mic. It'll be a mic between two, I think, and I'll just use the mic. So if you want to share this between the two of you, share this one, and I'll come back over here. First of all, in perhaps 25 words or less panel, that's each, just give us a bit of context. How do you come to be seated before us for those folks particularly that don't know you? So Heath, would you like to start?
Sure. My name's Heather Grennan. I'm a lecturer at Federation University, and I've been working at the uni for 11 years. Before that, I was up in Queensland working at an outdoor ed centre up there. And before that, I was trained in Canada and worked a lot in outdoor education with folks, kids and adults who were not so much school folks, but rather people who were in care or working with folks who are homeless or folks who had mental health issues. So a fairly diverse background.
Anthony.
Thank you. I'm Anthony Hall. I first led my first outdoor group when I was about 17. So I've been leading groups into the outdoors for over 35 years now. It's feeling old. I've taught in primary, secondary and tertiary institutions. I was on the original VOEA Council for quite some time, and now Managing Director of a private provider and the CEO of a registered training organisation in outdoor recreation.
Sam.
And I'm on the OV board.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, Andrew.
We were told we had to say if we're on the OV board, so I'm on the OV board. I started in schools as a phys ed teacher and loved the outdoors, but there was no outdoor ed, there was no outdoor units, no outdoor ed subjects, and we didn't learn it in university or anywhere else. So I just kept dragging all my phys ed students on camps, skiing, paddling, whatever I could, which eventually led me to running camps and working as an outdoor ed director at a school. And then from there went to tertiary and developed the outdoor ed program at Victoria College, which became Deakin University. I was there for 10 years and then asked to come across to ACU, Australian Catholic University, and start up the outdoor ed there. So had the joy of spending my life sharing the outdoors with students, which I am still outdoors, was outdoors this week with them, and I just absolutely love it.
Thank you, Sandy. And Clay?
I started my journey studying under Peter Martin at La Trobe University, and then worked for a few years freelancing with lots of mostly schools and a few different outdoor companies before getting a couple of full-time teaching positions, running outdoor ed camps, a little bit of time in the classroom, and recently just moved across to the emergency services. I'm a career firefighter in the CFA, and Peter Martin rang me up and said, I'm doing this keynote speech, well, sort of, and I'd like you to be part of the panel. And I was like, oh, fair enough. It's hard to say no to Peter Martin.
Thank you, Clay. Pete made a few points in his presentation. Let's get started. He makes an assertion about the purpose of outdoor education. Do you agree? Do you have a different point of view? And it'd be perhaps good to hear from each of you briefly. What do you think?
I would agree with Pete and his purpose. He, as Clay had said, I studied at Bendigo, and Pete just has this way of grabbing your attention, of putting forward some really good points of view. And if you look at that presentation, the purpose in outdoor education of intense, individual, purposeful relationships with nature is a really good explanation of what outdoor education should be. Sorry, if I grab the mic too much, just grab it from me, Heather. We have, as a subject, had to compromise ourselves over the years. And Jay Henderson's here back in the early 90s when we had to sort of sit under the HMPE banner to gain funding to try and be recognised. And we struggle with that. What exactly is our purpose, and that mismatch of, or this mulch of different purposes? Pete's explanation, I think, is concise, and if we follow that as a whole, we can have a coat hook to hang our hat on.
Thank you. You've got the mic, Clay. Would you like to?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, absolutely agree with Pete, and this possibly because he was the one who sort of moulded me into, who I am. But, he talks about how diverse we all are as an industry, and to find that that unifying thing that ties us all together so that we can have that same message that unites us, and that people can then recognise who we are and what we do, and that one thing is connecting people with nature, and all of the benefits that we all know flow on from that. So absolutely agree with Pete.
Heather?
I also agree. I didn't have Pete as a lecturer, but I did work with him later. And I think the key, and Pete talks often, well, he said it repeatedly, the idea behind the idea. And I think we can easily get stuck at what our purpose of outdoor education is, to build self-esteem, and there are lots of outcomes that we're aiming to do, but it's thinking about what is the idea behind that. So going a little bit deeper and not getting stuck at all of the good things that we do that are diverse, and thinking one step lower into that idea behind the idea.
I didn't have Pete as a lecturer either, and actually I'm going to disagree. I don't disagree with the premise behind what he's saying, that the purpose of outdoor education is to connect people to nature, but I think it needs another component there, because environmental studies connects people to nature, biology, geography, a lot of those other disciplines, curriculum areas, enable students to connect to nature. So what is that other aspect that we have which is really unique? And that's what we have toiled with over every decade. Every conferences we go through a series where we're really trying to nail down what it is, and we've grown and evolved hugely over the last 30 years. But I think stopping short on what Peter said robs us of a unique thing, and I think the unique thing he actually spoke about in that presentation is that we enable our participants to have the skills and knowledge to then develop an ongoing relationship with the natural world. And we need to make sure that if we're going to have a purpose of statement, that we display that point of difference that is different to outdoor learning, that is different to environmental studies, that is different to geography, that's different to biology. We give our participants, we share knowledge and skills that enable them to feel comfortable in the natural world and enables them to develop a relationship. And as if any of you have read any of Peter's writings on developing relationships with the natural world, we need to understand and be comfortable in the natural world for the natural world to become our friend, and we develop that relationship. So I think there's just a little, 6 or 7 word sentence that needs to go in front of that purpose.
Yeah, nice distinction, Sandy. Have we heard? I can't remember. Have we heard from you, Clay? Yeah, great. So Pete mentioned the 3 Ps, and he started off with the passion, but he also questioned and challenged us to understand that sometimes we get so engaged with this that sometimes what actually the students get could be a little different. So maybe you could share your own insights around that. Is that related to passion? Do you find the same thing? Maybe the students are getting something different to what we want. Who would like to kick that off?
Sure, I will. I think sometimes, yep, absolutely, they get something different. Sometimes it's because that we're not necessarily as clear, or the language that we speak isn't necessarily speaking the same language that the students understand. And this is from a university perspective. We generally try to say this is what we're trying to achieve, but I suspect that, and know actually from conversations with them, that it's not always the case. I see some of my students smiling in the background up there, so they're probably agreeing. But I also think that sometimes there can be the unexpected learning that comes from experiences, and being open to that, whether that's good or bad.
I think in relation to that, it's probably the most difficult part of our job to gauge what the students really are getting from the programs that we're running and the experiences that we're providing. And so it can be sort of easier to focus on some of those other outcomes that are maybe a little bit easier to identify. Oh yeah, we've built some relationships here, or they've got some confidence there, or whatever it might be. And if we're sort of looking at that real underlying aim that Pete's talking about, it's a more difficult thing to try and really ascertain. And you probably need to commit, a good amount of time to really teasing out some of those ideas and having those discussions with students to work out if we are meeting the things we're hoping to meet.
I would disagree with Pete a bit on this one. Each student we have is going to get something different out of our trips. That's okay. That's okay they get something different. Each one of them has something going on in their life at home, so they're going to view the environment or that time through a different lens, each and every one of them. So to have a narrow focus of one particular thing, hey, maybe that's a good way to aim, but we're all going to get different things out of it, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Sandy?
I think when you, and I'm in the position of training people to be outdoor leaders, I suppose, is got a little bit of a different framework on my participation in the outdoors with students. But when I read their journals, a lot of the time the light bulb, I think these guys have got it, or this student's got it, doesn't happen till third year. And I think the reason is that we all need our time to be in the outdoors and to go out there and have fun and to experience it, and not necessarily be on every trip connecting with nature. But then once we're out there and having fun and we think, wow, isn't this stunning, or isn't this beautiful, and then the relationship starts to build, like any relationship, like Pete describes, like a friendship. As you become more comfortable and you begin to really find the joy in the space that you're in, then that happens. But when I reflect on what I see from my students, I feel that it's only as they spend more time in the outdoors, and yes, they're getting input from us, from every unit and from every bit of theory and all the rest of it, but it actually is their journey of spending time in the outdoors and feeling comfortable that the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve seem to become more apparent.
Panel, Peter made a comment that I think sometimes even we, but particularly general society, use interchangeably, that outdoor education is not necessarily the same as learning outdoors. He was making a distinction there. So useful for all of us to hear. But what are your perspectives on that? Do we agree with Pete's assertion that they're different? And if so, how do we distinguish it? Is it even important?
Yeah, Sandy was talking about how, biology or environmental science can, be connecting people with nature. And I think, Pete articulates himself so brilliantly, and he sort of talks about creating that enduring connection with nature, and he was describing it as a friendship and that give and take. And I think that's how we need to distinguish ourselves as being unique from those other parts of learning or other areas where people can be outdoors. We need to be unique and hold that that point of difference where society values what we're contributing, and part of that is creating that common purpose that Pete's discussing here, and so that we are unified and people understand what it is that we're doing. Agree with?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. The whole thing was that learning outdoors is subject areas, and doing biology or doing environmental science is studying the item as a separate, distinct thing. I think what we're looking for is ourself and our relationship with it. And I'm a real advocate for the activities that we do. Now, for anyone who attended the national conference, and one of the guest lecturers was talking about post-activity outdoor education. And I don't know that I agree. I think that we need the activity. The activity actually allows us to connect with the environment. Going up a rock face and shoving your hand in a rock crack, hopefully there's no snake or anything in there, get you up and close with the environment. Being upside down in your kayak and having a look around gets you up and close with the environment, and that creates that relationship rather than studying it as a separate entity.
So with, I think I probably half agree and half disagree with the activity thing. I think activities are an amazing way to get people into an environment. If we can teach people how to be comfortable doing an activity in an environment, then they're going to then be able to start thinking about their relationship, and we can help to develop that enduring relationship. So I think the activity is the vehicle, but it's not necessarily, especially if you're upside down in your kayak freaking out because you actually don't know how to get back up again. I'm not sure you're going to create a relationship, but you're going to definitely create some respect. And then as you become more comfortable with being able to flip yourself back up, then that's when that relationship starts to develop.
The third P that Peter spoke of in regards our profession, he identified maybe two spectrums. Panel, one is, let's call it the FIFO, the fly in, fly out activity-based model, which is very popular. And at the other end, one that he was perhaps more accustomed and more comfortable with was the place-based pedagogy of the outdoors education. Is it possible to do both? Can we do a place-based outdoor ed in our current model of very much fly in, fly out, or are they very separate? What are your thoughts, your insights on that?
I disagree with you, Mark. I think Victoria-centric. I think we've moved a long way beyond that. Those programs still exist on a whole, but from my understanding within schools, even on just outdoor recreation activities. So if I may subcontract to learn a particular outdoor activity, get an outdoor activity run by an outdoor provider that's not educational based, nearly all of them frame, just even if it's a simple, say it's a surfing lesson, there's acknowledgement or welcome to acknowledgement of country, there's an understanding and an introduction as to the place and the space. I think in Victoria I'm not saying we're any different to other states, but what I witness is moved a long way along that continuum, even if it's not within an educational framework.
Yeah, look, I think I'm from a private provider. We do put a lot of kids out in the field, and the population that we have, it's a struggle to get staff that have a connection with every environment and every place we go to. Just the sheer volumes that we're talking about, it makes it really difficult. It would be lovely. And me as a person, I certainly have areas that I relate to, and I will go to an environment or place to recharge my batteries, and I would hope that everyone has a special place that's nice to them. But because of the pragmatics of the number of kids and logistics we've got to deal with, we do fly in, fly out, unfortunately, but it's the way it is.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'd like to say, is it possible to not have that fly in, fly out? I don't think it is possible at present, but I think in the future, if we sort of aim to and Pete's sort of talking about his pension card, if we can get those conditions, if we can get the society to value what it is that we contribute, and that allows us some of the conditions that Pete talks about, you know, how he had the time to think and talk and not just constantly be away in the bush. You know, those fly-in, fly-outs, as we've been referring to them, you know, they need to spend a lot of their time in the bush to make the money that they need to sustain themselves. So until we build that value in society, that these people can spend the time like Pete has, you know, reflecting and spending time in these places outside of just leading groups, then until that happens, no, it's not possible.
And I think the question that maybe we ask ourselves and ask others is, what do we lose for not knowing that place? So what are we saying it isn't important or we aren't going to gain from doing that fly-in, fly-out model? And perhaps that's something that we can use to talk about with people who are deciding how much we make, or, you know, increasing the value of what we do in society.
Do you think the fact that we do have these two models operating is one of the difficulties in achieving a unified purpose? That was one of Pete's primary purposes, was to unify this. Is that one of the reasons this is difficult?
Possibly, because if we're saying that, well, we can achieve this connection to nature regardless of where we go and what we know, as long as we know some stuff, we can go anywhere, then what is the, you know, can we actually achieve that underlying purpose of creating enduring relationships with natural places if we can just do whatever we want, wherever we want? Cool. Folks, we're going to turn the attention to you now, and we have really just a few minutes. Clearly not enough time. We knew that going into this, but if you can relate your question to the panel or to one person in particular, do you have a question? My guess is you will. Who would like to kick off?
My name's Liz White. I've had a long history of teaching outdoor ed in various sectors. I'm just entering the research zone, and I'm going to interview some students I had between 25 and 30 years ago in a 12-month program to see how they now understand that very significant, at 14, that very significant adolescent experience they had, to see if what they have in them now, or what they think that was about, and has it influenced their life. So one of my frustrations of listening both to Pete and to you is that my experience of many students who do the fly-in, fly-out model often don't know where they've been or why they went. And this is part of this problem of thinking, what is that unique thing we offer that we can't learn in the classroom? We can learn biology, we can learn geography, but there is that unique thing, that experiential time, developing relationship with the outdoors. What are your thoughts with the fact that in our current economic times, outdoor ed is packaged quite a lot in schools that don't have a long tradition of outdoor education? What's your thinking around how we can train our up-and-coming outdoor educators to touch base with what we actually think we're doing, that unique thing? Going to a place and being in that place and doing the rock climbing, the canoeing and all the rest of it. But how can we, what are your thoughts about how the students what they might have in their mind that they bring back that starts to build that ongoing sense of connection to nature?
Yeah, go for it, Clay.
Yeah, I might attempt to make some sort of answer at that. I think Pete mentioned that we often get caught up with the skill element of our trip, so we might focus on all the gear we're taking and sort of the invisibility of our purpose. And so I feel, yeah, if we're talking about educating our future leaders and teachers, people taking students out, we really need to focus on the relationship side of things that Pete was talking. You know, we're sort of the Cupid, I guess, if you could say that, between the students and nature. So if we can you know, and not every trip is going to be, you know, love at first sight. You know, it's going to be rainy and they're going to be upside down in kayaks and terrified, and but it's up to us to sort of highlight how, you know, that's a beautiful experience, and you know, the things that nature has provided them, whether it was sheer terror and, you know, or an appreciation of the comforts they have back home. So yeah, we just need to really sort of come down to fostering those relationships with people and nature.
Hi, Liz. I just think there's probably two aspects to answer your question. And the first one is the training that the leaders that are on your programs, that your participants have been on, that you're trying to get that result from. What is their background and training? Because the training of the leaders will frame how that activity is conducted, whether it's a one-off short outdoor recreational activity or whether it's an ongoing part of a longer immersive program. So choosing who's leading those activities and what framework they've had in terms of their training, I think, is essential. And then the other thing is to be okay with not necessarily getting a huge, deep and meaningful revelationary experience out of every experience. Like, it's okay to just have a one-off experience that you enjoyed. Yeah, and I think without continually immersive experiences, I think you're pushing to try and achieve a lot more. And it's actually, it's okay. And if they go and enjoy it and have felt safe and want to re-engage in that space again, then I think that's been a good outcome.
Look, I'll add to, I agree with that completely. Certainly from a commercial aspect, where a school comes to us and says they want to fill every minute of every day with an activity, we want to get bang for our buck. So I would say that less is more. Let's do less activity. The activity is really important, but if you can allow time to have those conversations and discussions, have some downtime to do that, then that's fantastic. But certainly on a commercial thing, when schools come to us and say, right, kids had too much downtime. They had an hour off here and they had an hour off there. We want to fill it with something. We'll have that discussion with our clients as such, but in the end, they've got the ultimate say. We can advise. For those of you who run your own programs within schools, you've got that opportunity. Say, right, well, we're just going to do nothing. And that's fantastic.
Let's take another question. Ben, I think you had your hand up. Big voice.
I'm Ben, I live in the Cosmos. And I think that we're sort of living in the... But I don't disagree with anything that was said, but the biggest problem that we're going to face, I think everyone would agree with this in this room, I think it's controversial, is climate change. But even if you don't accept that, it's not something that anyone here, or Pete Martin, or anyone knows the answer to. And I heard the best welcome to country that I've ever heard in my life this morning, in which there was a word which I'm going to have to follow up on, but it was something along the lines of come with intent. And even me talking here is sort of opposed to that, because we are going to have to do something that we don't know in order to overcome that challenge. And the students are the ones that are going to have the creative thoughts in relation to that space. So I guess my question is something along the lines of how do you guys reconcile those 3 Ps with that welcome to country that we heard, in the sense of empowering. I don't know, I guess we're talking about silos, and the answers to our problems aren't in silos, it's cross-pollinated. And I think outdoor is actually the most valuable vehicle to achieve that. I'm talking too much.
So Ben, to your questions, how do we reconcile what we heard this morning in terms of our welcome to country with Pete's message? Is that effectively your question?
If you accept that that mindset is a better road, and I don't know if it's a better road to tackle the problems that we're going to face, if you accept that they are problems, why are we talking about experts, as in ourselves, defining learning for students or something like that. But it's within the realms of those 3 Ps. I don't know what it is. But hopefully I didn't present people.
Panel?
Ben, I think you're absolutely on the key issues, and I think that's really the premise behind what Pete's saying, is that we have the power to enable people to develop relationships with the natural world, and without developing a relationship with the natural world, if you don't have a relationship with something, you can't care for it. You can't care for it, you can't move forward in the areas that you're talking about in terms of climate change. And then you're talking about the ways of being in the world traditionally from the last 65,000 years that are very different to the ways that, you know, in the last 200 years we've been in the world. And I think our profession is certainly very aware of learning, growing and being in that space a lot more. And in being in that space a lot more and developing the relationship with the natural world, then we are growing people that have that care, that stewardship to move forward on the issues that are rightly so the most important in our generations and lifetime.
Yep.
Go for it, Heather.
Yep. And I think it's not about giving, like, we aren't telling students what they're learning. All we're doing is enabling them to create this relationship so that when the time comes and they need the creativity to do whatever needs to be done in order to moderate climate change, that they have that motivation to do that.
No further? Sorry, I had to come around here, but I can't see who might want to talk now. We knew we didn't have enough time, and it is a catalyst for the engagement, the conversation that we encourage you to continue with. I know in preparation, panel, for our keynote, which we had seen before, I posed the challenge, like, okay, Pete provided his understanding, his purpose for outdoor education. Was there anything just finalised before I then set you up for the rest of the day? Anything you wanted to add? Did you have something you prepared that you believe to be your purpose of outdoor education? Did you have a statement? Anything you wish to finish off with? Remember, this is being recorded.
I had a few versions that sort of constantly changed and seemed to make less sense with each change. But I think it is about just beginning that relationship with the people that we are leading and to sort of start that shift from disconnection with the natural world. It's a very long journey, a journey that we've probably all gone on, and we are now firm believers. We are, preaching to the converted to say, oh, look after the environment. It's really wonderful. But for the people we're working with, they might not have taken any of those first steps in that journey. And the trips that we run, hopefully, are those first steps. And they might be backward steps if it's a negative experience for them because it's a horrible, wet, windy weather. But obviously, if we're sort of up there, in our rain jacket, having a good time, that's obviously going to be, like, what's that crazy person having fun in the rain for? But, we have a big influence on those people during those trips, and hopefully we can create some strong connections in the future, and that might take a very long time.
I think Sandy said it before, in that fundamentally what Pete has said is right, but it's about giving, and this the enabling. That's the addition. Yeah.
Got it. Sandy or Anthony?
So my point was enabling. I'm not going to say any more about that. But I also just want to frame it that for a long time, and it was in 2001 that we came together as a profession and said, well, there I just used the word profession. Are we a profession? I mean, my view is that we definitely are a profession. Other people would say we're an industry. But what are we? What do we want to be? Do we want to be a profession? Do we want to be an industry? And what's the difference? And Pete always proposed that the difference is that there's a motive of service in the profession. Whether that's doctors or lawyers or whatever, there's a motive of service. And what was our motive of service? And in 2001, we came up with a motive of service that was about developing people who had sustainable behaviour. In this presentation, he's saying, what is the end game? What is our true purpose, which is a motive of service? service which reflects our profession, and that's what he's asking us to become unified in. So if we agree or we want to be a profession, what is our motive of service?
Look, I'd agree to that. What I add is that I think what you do now, what we do now, is of increasing importance. I have not seen a greater disconnect with our environment in history for the youth that we have today. They, in my view, and probably most of you, need to regain that connection, and we are the important link to get this profession correct so that we can connect these young people again.
Please, Sandy.
Who was at the national conference in Tassie? Can you put your hands up? Who was at Bob Brown's address? Yeah. What did he say? Do you remember? Jeff? He said, Bob Brown said, we are the most important people leading the generations to come. Because without us influencing the young people of the world to connect to natural world and therefore have a relationship and to be able to have a sustainable view on that, we're stuffed. And he actually got very emotional about it to the point that he couldn't talk, but he said it 3 or 4 times. Our profession is above and beyond the most critical going into the future. So let's embrace it.
Good connection, Sandy. Thank you.